Welcome back. Now for our final headline today. And honestly, this one might be the most fascinating story in the entire market. Because while geopolitical tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East, Bitcoin is holding up surprisingly well. Despite ongoing U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian targets and retaliatory responses in the region, Bitcoin didn't collapse like many traders expected. In fact, after briefly dipping towards $63,000 earlier in the conflict, Bitcoin quickly recovered and has now surged all the way back above $73,000. That's a remarkable recovery, considering the level of global uncertainty. Traditionally, when geopolitical risk spikes, investors tend to rush toward assets like U.S. Treasuries, gold, or the dollar. Risk assets, including stocks and crypto, often struggle in those environments. But this time, something interesting happened. While equities were sliding under the weight of war headlines, Bitcoin began stabilizing and eventually rallying. Strategists at firms like Bloomberg Intelligence and CoinDesk Research say this could be an early sign that Bitcoin is beginning to mature as a global asset class. Not necessarily a perfect safe haven, but perhaps something that's less dependent on traditional market correlations than it once was. In other words, instead of simply reacting to macro fear, Bitcoin may increasingly be trading on its own internal drivers, things like institutional flows, ETF demand, and industry-specific developments. And we saw several of those drivers today. ETF inflows returning, a historic Federal Reserve banking milestone for Kraken, and renewed regulatory momentum in Washington. All of that combined to create a narrative that overpowered geopolitical fear, at least for now. If Bitcoin continues showing strength during periods of global stress, that could attract even more institutional capital looking for diversified exposure. But of course, the situation in the Middle East remains fluid, and prolonged conflict could still create volatility across all markets. So this story is definitely one to keep watching.